back, Weather Kingdom. In this update, we are going to be actually taking a very in-depth look at what could we be expecting as we close out August. Will we see another storm? And the answer is maybe. There is some indication today that there could be our seventh name or sixth name storm, maybe potentially somewhere in the main development region. There's a small signal on the European model today, Canadian model, and some of the ensembles that some type of wave or a very powerful wave that could try and come off Africa, but there is some indications that it actually might never get to develop. And I'm going to be explaining that in this update. So on the National Hurricane Center, we actually don't see anything really prompt there. We might see another yellow box in the next couple days. We'll have to wait and see further models and conditions in the main development region. We did get Fernando or Fernand. Sorry about the pronouncing, but we did get Fernand, and yeah, you guys are like, wow, it went up to 60. It was actually supposed to be potentially weak Category 1 hurricane. It developed a little later, had some dry air, had some issues, and at this point, Fernand will start to weaken as it enters cooler waters and more unfavorable upper level wind shear. Then we take a look around the Atlantic, and honestly, there is nothing right now, but like I said, a potential area in the main development region. There is some indications that maybe some further stuff with the CAG area over here, the Central American Gyre, as we get into September, in the mid-September, and then more main development region storms. Question is, how will the pattern be and the favorability? Right now, we're actually in a unfavorable environment, and I'm going to be explaining on why and how long could this unfavorable conditions last for. So we take a look at the MJO forecast. I'm doing this on the fly. I'm very sorry about that, but we take a look at the MJO forecast, and honestly, it's very interesting here on the latest one. It looks like it tries. We kind of go. This is about the first of now September, and we're kind of in more of a neutral 1 and 2 phase, and that does actually favorable the East Pack. Once again, like I said, once we hit 3s and 4 and 2, that's more of the favorability in the Atlantic, and you can tell there's a lot of spaghettis. We actually have some that kind of goes in the bigger environment like this in phases 6 and 7. That's most likely the unlikely, as we see a lot of actually more today go into phases 1, and the question is, does this kind of go back into phase 2 and then neutral, or does it go in phases 3 and 4 for the Atlantic? Those are questions that still needs to be answered, but right now with the MJO is actually not favorable for the Atlantic, and it won't help anytime soon, at least in the next week or 2. Maybe if we see a difference, but we look at all these models, and they're really more consistent on phases 1. There is some indications on some models that, it ends up more on phases 5, and actually 1 goes into phases 4. We see more ensembles go into phases 4. That will actually waken the Atlantic a little bit quicker, but we'll be out of that favorability a little bit quicker if we go the full way around. That's only one model. We take a look at the European, kind of saying that we will see it generally go back into phases 1, and then looks like phases 2, and then looks like even phases 3. We're going to have to keep an eye on this as the MJO changes a lot, and could we see more of a quicker, like how quick does it get to phases 3 and 4? That would depend on how quick we are in this rut throughout the Atlantic hurricane season. This is a different type of European, and it takes it a little bit longer, takes it a little bit more north, and by the 6th, you're still in the neutral phase here. The emin kind of never gets it. It kind of keeps it in neutral phase. It always does. I'm never like really on it. And then this is another version of the Emmon here that kind of actually goes into phases 1, 2, and then 3. We'll have to keep an eye on that. And then the Boma keeps it in phases 7. And this one keeps it between 1 and 2 and 8. So we'll have to continue to watch this as the MJO is always changing. But regardless on that, let's take a look at something else. So now I want to take a look at the water temperatures, and honestly this has warmed significantly, especially in the main development region where we were seeing a lot of 26 all the way down here. All right, and then this kind of went like this. We have actually gained a very warmth amount where now that 27-degree line is all the way up to 20 north, even a little bit of 21 north. And it actually does produce favorability now right off the Africa coast. So if we do actually see a more of a high latitude system, the water temperatures, unlike 2 weeks ago when we have that wave, instead of it actually having, what's the hurricane? Erin. When Erin came more like this and then that, we were actually in 24 and 25 degrees Celsius. So in just a few weeks, the main development region has warmed significantly. All right. There's indications that a wave could try to move right through these islands and actually for water temps, and then kind of moves like this, and then we'll have to wait and see. And in that case scenario now, the water temperatures are favorable to get a tropical storm, even a hurricane. So something to really watch for and continue to see how these waters continue to warm. We go into deeper like the Western Antilles, Lesser Antilles, Caribbean. We continue to warm. We are now generally around 29, 28, and 30 degrees Celsius. So very favorable for systems to go in the Caribbean. Also in the subtropics where we're still generally around 29, 30 degrees. It has shrunk a bit because Hurricane Erin moving in this path has actually caused quite a bit of upwelling right where I just lined it. We'll have to see if that does try and warm back. I don't think it will warm back completely like it used to, but it will definitely keep the waters a little cooler as we get into the fall months, because usually the time is now where the East Coast starts seeing that cooling off. Like off the coast of Georgia, we are starting to see that cooling, and more of the Gulf Stream gets a little bit cooler, that we do start to expect that. But regardless, what's a CAG system? Okay, we're going to go into that. And why we're going to go in that right now is because of the water temperatures is a big reason. So this is the CAG usually. This is where it develops. The term is Central America gyre. We usually see this in the beginning of the season and towards the end of the season. Usually what it is a very broad low pressure. Basically, let's go into a little bit bigger here. We're going to use this. Basically, a broad low pressure like that brings tropical waves from the South America, and sometimes these goes into the Caribbean, and sometimes they get spit out with another piece of energy that's coming from the low level center. Also, it helps the East Pack, and sometimes we even see systems go in the Bay Campeche, and sometimes we see little low pressures and things to come off this. But if we get a busy Central America gyre, this will be very bad, as the entire Gulf of Mexico is running way above average. We are now starting to get 2 degrees Celsius, 32 degrees Celsius, very much more widespread. We have 32 degrees Celsius now, averaging now in the Keys of Florida and the Bahamas. We even see another spot of 31 degrees here. Even parts of here, this is now 31.5, 32 across Texas coast. Even in these brighter purples, we're seeing 31 to 32 degrees Celsius. That's about 88 to 90 degrees water temperatures, and that's very significant as we have very good OHC in this environment. If we do get a very robust Central American gyre as we enter mid-September into late October, we can actually produce a lot of big homegrown systems that goes into the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean that could honestly, might say, hey, the season for the main development region wasn't busy this year, but if we get a busy CAG, yeah, we're not just gonna have a busy year. We're gonna have a very destructive year, as 80% of the time, or even more than that, when we get a low pressure in the Caribbean or the Bay of Campeche, look at where these lows will go. They're impacting land somewhere. Even in this low, if it tried going out to sea, it's still impacting Cuba, Jamaica, or Dominican if it goes out like that. All like the CAG is really bad because 90% of the time at least it makes landfall somewhere on land. Unlike the main development region, we can look at it as some time away. But if we get a busy Central American gyre this season, not just the waters are very warm, but there is hardly any wind shear. And we're going to be taking a look at that in just a moment. When we take a look at the shear vectors here, this is a very favorable map here. We have no shear right now in the main development region. In the entire main development region, we got under 15 knots of shear, where I just circled in yellow. No shear. You guys see any yellow, red? Nope. Not even in the subtropics here. The subtropics, besides the very far north, like 30 latitude, we're very favorable with shear right now. And even in the Gulf of Mexico, this is another very favorable area that the Gulf is no shear right now. A lot of shears over America. Even in the Caribbean, we do have a little bit of shear that's going through right now. That is currently why Invest 91L, that was a potential, kind of now got completely teared apart about the shear and is not going to find any more favorability anytime soon. So something to keep an eye on, as the favorability with wind shear, water temperatures are very warm. Now I want to take a little bit of a look at the models before we do end this update here. Thank you guys for staying tuned at this point of the video. Sorry if it's not too organized. I am trying to make it as much organized as possible in most edits and realistic, and try and just give you guys enough information even when the tropics are quiet. So for now, until the tropics actually pick up, I will not be going live at night. Maybe once this week, but we're going to take actually a little break from the live, and we're going to just post some videos and updates, because I'm pretty sure as the Atlantic continues to go on, this is a quiet period. I want to take it as a resting time as night before we go right back into live streaming constantly. So thank you guys. Sorry about the wait, and let's get into the models. So now we take a look at the latest GFS. We just look at the next 48 hours. There is seriously nothing. Next 72 hours, nothing. Next 4 days, there is just one little wave in the main development region. Some of the other models show more development out of it. GFS, never been a fan of it. I don't blame it. And then we kind of see in the next 10 days even, no activity. There is a little signal that is coming out of the GFS now, where this part, let's go here, let's change it. There's a little signal that a wave could try and come off the, once again, South America, move into the Caribbean. We start getting that Central American gyre. It starts to throw a seedling at us, and there is indications that maybe we see some development, but this is 10 days out. we kind of keep going, and it never really gets going until we get another shot here that goes into the Bay of Campeche, another tropical wave right there. Never really gets going. That system kind of actually goes in the east pack, and then we get another signal right at the end, around the peak of the Atlantic hurricane season, where the Central American gyre is now popping 1,007 millibar. And guarantee you, if this went out, this would have become a hurricane, and even a major hurricane because of the favorability. But in the main development region, there is nothing. And I don't think the GFS is catching on to that. I think it's more catching on to the Central American gyre that we'll have to continue to watch. I do think we'll get a little bit more active in the main development region than the GFS shows. But we look at the dry air, and honestly, around the peak of the hurricane season, there is hardly no dry air, even in the main development region. And even in these soon waves, we actually do see that wave come off Africa at pretty high latitude. You can easily tell there's our wave. It's a little high on the GFS, in my opinion. But why it doesn't get to develop, there's not too much dry air where we're seeing 5s and 10s, but we're still seeing 20s and 15s. And you could kind of tell what happens here. It kind of gets ingested in the wave, and eventually it gets choked off. Some of the other models keep it even less, and then look, boom. That wave actually just kind of goes out in the Atlantic, but overall, the Saharan dust has really calmed down from previous weeks. So Saharan dust is not bad. The shear is not bad. I mean, the favorability is there. The water temperatures are there. The only thing right now that's really keeping the Atlantic from big time popping off is the MJO. So the MJO right now is a very big key. It's like running a car. If you don't have the oil, or you don't have the gas and you have the oil, it's not going to run. All right. You need every piece working for a storm to get developed. Okay. That's the bottom line. And we take a look at the shear here at the wind shear at September 10th. And seriously, there's not too much to really talk about. There's not too much off the main development region. We kind of stay pretty favorable. Maybe some shear picks up in the main development region towards this time with a tut. We'll have to wait and see. This is, remember, 15, 20 days out. We take a look at the Canadian. That shows a little bit more of a different case scenario. And it shows that wave coming off Africa at pretty high latitude, a little bit lower, never gets fully developed. And then once we get in the main development region, we do see maybe a potential tropical depression or storm. This will be about 10 days out. So like I said, something to watch out with that wave. And we do see another wave, more waves coming off Africa. So I think once the MJO wakes up, the favorability honestly will be there for development. Once again, right here, the favorability with the Saharan dust and dry air is actually extremely favorable. And we can have maybe attempts at yellow blobs off the southeast coast as we get a stationary front. The shear also on this, not any at this point. We got a pretty good corridor here of no shear in the main development region where development's possible, and even in the Caribbean and even parts of the Gulf where it's not any shear. There's some in the northern parts, but that's because of troughs and cold fronts and depending on the timing with the system and all that. But it is interesting that the Canadian has picked up on that. We'll have to wait and see on the models. The European model does show pretty much the same thing as the Canadian. Shows a pretty robust tropical wave coming off at higher latitude than the Canadian. And then moves south, and it honestly does get into development. And it's something to watch out here where it kind of struggles. We even see another high latitude. That one probably won't even form. That's a little too high. But we do see that tropical wave continuing to move. And at this point, we have a tropical wave Not too well defined here, but it does show a tropical wave generally moving like this, and then in this direction. And then we see another tropical wave that actually just goes like this and dies off. If that can come a little bit more south, I think the favorability will be a little bit better. But something to watch out here, as it looks like this tropical wave is starting to get a little bit more robust towards the end of the frame. And once again, we do see some more attempts at CAG systems, but not really on the Euro. And honestly, the dry air at this point and the Saharan dust, there is a bit on this wave here. This is that tropical wave. We do got some pretty good dry air, especially to the southern side of this, that is surrounding this tropical wave, but it does do a pretty good job. Also, we have another tropical wave that comes off here and does have the moisture and the ability to develop. So Saharan dust on the GFS is a little bit less, Euro a little bit more. Something to keep an eye on. The wind shear part of this is not too bad, especially with the system that gets to this point. This is that tropical wave. There is more shear on this side, but overall pretty good outflow. Not too favorable, but it's favorable. And overall, the entire Atlantic basin here, especially in the tropics at this time, towards the peak of the hurricane season, is very little to no wind shear. Maybe some little spots, but that changes day by day. So that's your European here. Now I want to take a look at the weather models. So let's take a look at the European ensembles and the GEFS ensembles, and then that will wrap it up in this update, as this has been a very important update, and probably we'll try and make another one tomorrow. So this is the latest European ensembles, and very interesting enough, we do see a signal of maybe one or even two little ensembles in the Gulf of Mexico. That's because of the CAG area, and even a little bit of low pressures here that tries and seedlings. That will probably be more ramped up as we get into mid-September. But according to this, we do see a tropical wave. That's that tropical wave. Not too much support on the ensembles, but it does show potential our next area to watch. Also very interesting, it does show a few interesting low pressures that develop off the East Coast. That's another area to watch. But overall, to the latest European ensembles, not too much. And compared to 0Z, this had, the main development region had more but weaker. Latest, and then had really nothing off the East Coast and nothing in the Bay Campeche. 12Z pops a little bit there, pops a little bit more there, and a little bit stronger there. So something to keep an eye on. Not too much of a difference from last night, but a little bit more of a hint. And there is definitely hints in the GEFS. The 12Z GFS also hints at a bit of CAG slash seedlings in these regions. Something to watch. And then, maybe off the southeast coast, more weak low pressures. But the bigger thing I'm looking at is by the peak of the hurricane season, look where we are at. We see quite a few more low-level centers. Something to keep an eye on out, according to the GEFS. And then we got a few other ensembles, like the GDM. Also shows a few Gulf of Mexico ensembles, and then a few ensembles out of that tropical wave that comes off Africa. We'll keep you guys updated on that. And then the GDM totally too. And then shows another potential tropical wave here. So for that being said, that will wrap it up in this update. I hope you guys like the in-depth update. If you guys want me to look at anything else more in detail, please let me know, as I will love to do so in tomorrow's video. Have a good night, you guys. Thank you guys for all the support. And let's get this video up to 1,000 views. Last video, we crushed it with almost 800 views. Best video yet on the channel. And that was very supportive. So thank you guys. Please like, please subscribe, and see you guys in the next Tropical Outlook and discussion. See ya.